Most of us have heard of dispensationalism. So how did that theology make it here? And why is it like the de facto go-to heresy of every single evangelical church in North America?
Dispensationalism. How does that word make you feel? For a lot of people these days, that word has become a hot button topic. A lot of people have a lot of opinions, and a lot of people really don't even understand what dispensationalism is. So today we are going to be doing a response to a guy named John Welnick, who is more commonly known as the Charismatic Calvinist. He put out a video not too long ago about dispensationalism and its history and why it shouldn't be believed. And while I'm personally not a dispensationalist, I did study at a dispensational university and have a biblical studies degree from a dispensational university. And so I just want to point out that a lot of things that he said here are just both factually incorrect and is also misleading people. And I think it demonstrates a stream of thought that's been happening recently where people have been very anti-dispensationalism, but for reasons that I wouldn't necessarily consider to be biblical. So with that, let's jump into it.
Why are most American non-denominational evangelical churches dispensational? Most of us have heard of dispensationalism. It was invented by a man named John Nelson Darby in England during the time of the Second Great Awakening, except he didn't actually take part in the Second Great Awakening. He wasn't an itinerant preacher here in the States. So how did that theology make it here? And why is it like the de facto go-to heresy of every single evangelical church in North America? Well, see, it's interesting.
Okay, so right off the bat, he calls dispensationalism heresy. And that's already a really strong term that I'm not sure that he's quite ready to be using to describe dispensationalists by and large, or dispensationalism. Scripture talks about what heresy is. 2 Peter 2:1 says, quote, "But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will also be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves." So, according to Scripture, people who promote heresies are denying the master who bought them. And so, ergo, without any qualifications that John gives, people who promote dispensationalism are people who are denying the master who bought them. Titus 3:10 says, "A man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition should be rejected." So that means that if a heretic, someone who believes a heresy, and if dispensationalism is a heresy, then if they don't repent after one or two tries, then they need to be put out of the church. And my question is, are we ready to do that to people who have been strong, godly, biblical teachers? People like John MacArthur, people like Costi Hinn, people like Justin Peters, people like Dwight L. Moody. Like, are you ready to say these people need to be put out of the church? And I'm going to guess that he doesn't think that. And that may just be because he's being very sloppy with how he's describing the word heresy. The most common colloquial understanding of what it means to be a heretic is to really, genuinely, to not be a Christian, to be functionally against what the church believes and thereby to be put out of it. And I don't think that's a fair description. I can say that there are things wrong with dispensationalism, and I can say there are very extreme ends within dispensationalism that would qualify as a heresy. Things like saying that there are two different modes of salvation, but that's a hyper version of dispensationalism and not the kind that you're dealing with in the majority of modern evangelical churches.
It's interesting. One of the few times Darby was visiting the States, he met a man named D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody, for some reason...
So that's already not true. So right off the bat, in terms of history, he is immediately not just slightly wrong, but just completely incorrect. The way in which Darby and Moody met was not by Darby going to America and meeting Moody. It is true, Darby only had a few American tours. He was not involved in the Second Great Awakening in America because it was an American thing, and Darby was in Britain. What actually happened was in 1867, Moody was on one of his trips, his first trip actually, to England, where he met Darby and they had their first meeting together. Now, it's possible that he's equating Moody with a man named James H. Brooks, who would be considered the leading proponent of dispensationalism. before more popular names pop up like Dwight L. Moody or C.I. Scofield and people like that. But already that's just incorrect. This is an incorrect explanation of dispensationalism's history.
Moody, for some reason, was taken by Darby's eschatology and decided to adopt it and start teaching it to his own students.
So, and this is very important, and usually I don't want to have to split hairs like this, but strictly speaking, dispensationalism is not an eschatology. Premillennialism is an eschatology. Futurism is an eschatology, but dispensationalism is not an eschatology. Dispensationalism is a hermeneutic. And a hermeneutic, for those that don't know, is basically like a science of interpreting the Bible, a means in which you interpret the Bible. Dispensationalism's hermeneutic is basically the idea that the people of Israel and the people of the church are two distinct people before God, and they are not the one covenant people of God. That is a hermeneutic, and it does have drastic eschatological consequences to its hermeneutic. So all dispensationalists are going to end up becoming premillennial. They're going to believe in a kind of like future, more graphic, literalistic end time stuff. But that's not, strictly speaking, what dispensationalism is. And I want you to pay attention here to what John said. He said that he, for some reason, found his eschatology, and it's not an eschatology, but he found his eschatology important, and so he started to teach his students. So, and again, let's be careful here with the truth, and let's be careful with history. But he says he started to teach his students. And so what does that imply to you? That means he must have students at this time. Ergo, he must be a teacher. Well, we know about the Moody Bible Institute, which was formerly called the Chicago Bible Institute, but that was not actually founded until 1886, and therefore he didn't have students until 1886. So this is actually off by a large margin.
Well, one of his students was a man named Cyrus Scofield.
And again, this is another incorrect historical take. Scofield, Cyrus Ingerson Scofield, was not one of D.L. Moody's students in a kind of like academic way. Like I said, the Moody Bible Institute wasn't founded until 1886. Scofield didn't even become a Christian until about 1879 or 1880. And it is true that they had some kind of connection early on, at about that same time, 1879 or so. We know that Scofield was involved in some of Moody's evangelistic outreaches, but he wasn't like a personal disciple of Moody in any sense. He was a personal disciple of James H. Brooks, who was a Presbyterian minister. And Brooks was really the major proponent of dispensationalism in the 1800s in America. It was not so much Moody.
Cyrus Scofield had absolutely zero formal education in theology or ancient languages.
So he had zero formal study in theology or ancient languages. So that is true. He did have no formal, he was not formally educated in terms of a seminary or things like that. But I do want to point out that he calls Scofield one of Moody's students. And I just want to point out that while that's not true, he wasn't one of his students. The very fact that you're a student and yet you have no formal education in theology is an oxymoronic statement. Like he either isn't his student and doesn't have formal education, or he is his student and he does. So it's incorrect to say he was his student, but even if he was his student, then you couldn't say he had no formal education.
So of course, the natural thing for that man to do is write a study Bible.
The issue here is compounding. He compounds historical things. So like I said, he meets Moody in around 1879, 1880. He's certainly saved by 1880 or so under the tutelage of a man named James Brooks. But he doesn't actually write the Scofield Study Bible that he's referencing until 1909. So that's decades apart. It's not as though it feels as though he's painting a picture where Scofield is sitting at a student's desk listening to Moody teach, and while he's sitting there as a student thinks he has the bright idea to go write a study Bible, when that's not the case. This is decades removed after everything that he has been learning and after all of his training has completed is finally done. So it's not a fair thing to compound these things in terms of being historically honest.
What's interesting though, at this time, 1909, there are no study Bibles in existence, right? So your ESV, where it has like the text on the top, and then
So that's not true either. The first study Bible, in terms of the idea of having like notes on the page along with the biblical text, that goes back to the 1500s, the 16th century, with the Geneva Bible. So no, that's not true. The Scofield Reference Bible was not the first one to do that. That this was not a brand new thing. This is something that happened in history.
so your ESV, where it has like the text on the top, and then like the theologian on the bottom tells you what the text means, that didn't exist. And Cyrus Scofield wasn't a theologian, but he gave it a shot. He gave it his best shot. This book, the Scofield Reference Bible, takes the shelves by storm because people are so impressed by the fact that, wow, I can read the Bible and have my own little mini theologian on the bottom, not a theologian, telling me what the text means.
He's implying that the way in which dispensationalism spread throughout America was mainly through the common man walking into the proverbial market store and finds a Scofield Reference Bible off a shelf and then picks it up and takes it home with them, and now everybody's a dispensationalist. But the problem is, that's not how it happened. Actually, the way in which dispensationalism spread was actually through a more scholarly way. What was happening at the time was something known as the modernist fundamentalist controversy, where basically, to make a very long story short, I'm trying to be honest here, it's a long story and I'm cutting it short. There was basically an issue of liberalism spreading into the seminaries, into the academic field, and you had a situation where a lot of theologians were becoming liberal or were becoming modern, as opposed to the more conservatives who called themselves fundamentalists, as in they held to the fundamentals of Christianity. This was before the negative connotations of the term fundamentalist came about. This was back just when you were trying to say that you were a conservative Christian who believed the Bible, and you were a theologian, and you were a scholar, and you were a seminarian. And it's in the context of all those things where dispensationalism starts to grow, because you have this situation where a bunch of conservative scholars are suddenly kicked out of the seminaries, and they've lost all their cultural sway. They've lost all their academic prestige. They don't know what to do. And now you have this new thing called dispensationalism that is making its way in America. And they're basically saying that things are not going to get better. Things are actually going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. People, I think, unfairly applied a lot of the things that the scripture was speaking about to their own day and assumed that dispensationalism must be true from that. But that was a scholarly thing and not merely a common man issue where you were going to Walmart and getting a Scofield Reference Bible off the shelf.
Now, of course, Scofield learned from Moody, learned from Darby. Scofield's a dispensationalist. Everyone who reads this Bible now is going to be taken with dispensational theology. But it doesn't stop there. It gets even worse. A man named Louis Sperry Schaeffer. Louis Sperry Schaeffer, you've never heard of him. He learned from Scofield, was a protege of Scofield. He founded a little institute called the Dallas Theological Seminary. You might have heard of that one. That, along with the...
I want you to see the two things he's doing, where every other breath he was making comments about how Scofield wasn't smart, how he wasn't educated, how he didn't know anything. And yet he brings up Dallas Theological Seminary, which is an extremely prestigious institution. I know plenty of DTS grads, and they're some of the smartest people I've known. So you can't say with one breath that dispensationalism is foolish and it was founded by a foolish man, and then in the same breath also say, well, dispensationalism is embedded in the founding of this academic institution, and act like those things aren't adverse to each other. This was not some idiot coming up with things. Scofield studied under James H. Brooks, who had studied at Princeton Theological Seminary. And B.B. Warfield himself, the famous Princeton theologian, thought that Brooks was an incredibly intelligent man who knew the ancient languages super well, who knew theology super well. And also, Brooks ended up receiving a Doctor of Divinity from Westminster College and the University of Missouri. This guy was not some stupid person, and he personally discipled Scofield for years and years and years at a time, until finally Scofield was ordained a Congregationalist minister in 1883, which again is 3 years prior to when the Moody Bible Institute was founded. So you can't say that Scofield is just stupid. He didn't know things, and then also say, well, DTS was founded, which is a great institution, academically speaking, and the Moody Bible Institute was founded with dispensationalism involved in all of that. Like I said, the reason why this came about was not just because some common people were finding this on shelves, but because this was a scholarly and theological answer by scholars and theologians to try and explain the situations that were surrounding them. I don't want to say it was merely scholarly. I'm sure that it was true that the common man was getting impacted by this, but it's not true to say that it was merely the common man either.
That, along with the Moody Bible Institute, are responsible for training hundreds of thousands of dispensationals in the last 100 years. And they've all gone on to plant churches.
So, I want you to hear what he said. He said that with DTS and Moody Bible Institute combined, they have pumped out hundreds of thousands of dispensationals who have all, he didn't qualify, he said that have all gone to plant churches. So how many is hundreds of thousands? That is minimally 200,001. That minimally. So do the numbers actually stack up? According to Dallas Theological Seminary's catalog, which was published sometime around 2021, they say that under 18,000 people have graduated from DTS. So you better hope the Moody Bible Institute is making up for those numbers that DTS is clearly lacking in. The problem is, what I've been able to find anyway, what we see with Moody Bible Institute, if you include both the college as well as the seminary, somewhere over 50,000 alumni, 47,000 about still alive, and over 50,000 in total. So it's possible that you could get up into the tens of thousands in terms of graduates, but you can't get to over 200,000 people graduating from this. And you could say, well, maybe he's just talking about students, people who have graduated from there. The problem is, he said they have all gone on to plant churches. He didn't say some of them. He said all of them have gone on to plant churches. And that's just demonstrably not the case. But I do think it's important that you note here what he just said. The reason why dispensationalism has become so strong in America is because of the academic institution. This is a top-down issue. You had the scholars in the late 1800s, early 1900s, starting to come to a dispensational conviction. They founded seminaries as well as Bible institutes and Bible colleges, which then taught people who would go on to be pastors dispensationalism, who would thus then teach their congregants dispensationalism. So don't make the mistake of thinking that this is just the poor man's theology. This is an academic issue. There are plenty of godly and intelligent men who are dispensational. People like Dr. Abner Chow, people like John MacArthur, and the like. This is certainly an academic issue and needs to be dealt with academically.
So if you're wondering why most non-denominational evangelical churches happen to be dispensational, it's because of Darby, and then Moody, and then Scofield, and then Sperry Schaefer. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. My gosh. So why make this video in the first place? A lot of the issues that I had with this video is mainly just purely incorrect historical details, as well as some subversive stuff, as I mentioned. But the reason why I want to talk about this stuff is not specifically because of John. I'm sure John's a great guy. I'm sure John's done some good stuff. I noticed that in his bio, he said his pronouns are handsome and intelligent, which is funny. Anyway, I want to ask the question is, what was the motivation to make a video like this? Was it coming from a biblical basis? If it was coming from a biblical basis, then you'd assume that some text would be cited. But no text was cited. In fact, this was purely slander. I don't mean to throw around that word lightly, but you told a public forum things about a man that were not true so that you could discredit that person's reputation. That is definitionally slander. You did not do that on a biblical basis, and you actually went against biblical principles to do so. And also, I want to point out that having a view of anti-dispensationalism, I don't want to accuse John of being anti-dispensational. I don't know that. But I do know that anti-dispensationalism has been on the move recently. This idea of throwing off everything that we've inherited, and dispensationalism is one of the things that we've inherited. This idea of throwing that off is not good, because you can't just believe in nothing. You can't be anti something merely. You have to replace that with something else. I'm not a dispensationalist. But John makes me want to be a dispensationalist sometimes. I'm not a dispensationalist because I am a covenantalist, because I believe in covenant theology. It's because I have a biblical and a theological reason where I believe that God has one covenant people group, and that he doesn't have two distinct covenant people groups. He doesn't have two brides, where he has the bride of the church and the bride of Israel. I believe that God is monogamous in his marriage. I believe that on biblical grounds, and I believe that on theological grounds. But I don't believe it on, and I'm not accusing John of this at all, but I don't believe that because of political reasons. And that's really why I wanted to talk about this today, because the issue that I've been seeing a lot recently is that a lot of people are wanting to justify their political views with their theology. And again, none of this is intended at John. I just thought that this would be a good springboard to talk about this. A lot of people have come to political convictions, and they recognize that they need the Bible to back it up. And one of those political convictions is to hate the state of Israel, and more specifically, to hate Jews. I am about as conservative as you can get, and yet I still believe that I've seen real and genuine anti-Semitism that's been going around, not just in anti-Christian circles, but especially in a lot of Christian circles, even Reformed and Calvinistic Christian circles. And what I've noticed is they understand that there is a theology of dispensationalism that would not allow them to hate that neighbor. They want to hate their neighbor, but they realize that this theology does not allow them to hate that neighbor. And so they need to be able to justify themselves against dispensationalism. So their goal is to discredit dispensationalism, to show why dispensationalism isn't true, and therefore to be justified in their dislike towards the Jews and their dislike towards the state of Israel. Now, the issue with that is you can't just be anti-something. You have to have something instead of that. You shouldn't dislike dispensationalism because you have a political opinion. You should dislike dispensationalism because you're convinced that the scriptures bear witness to a beautiful theological truth about God and his people, not because of how you feel about the Jews, or how you feel about Israel, or how you feel about the Republican or Democratic Party, or any of them. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of conservative young people who have been throwing off what they've inherited and are not grounding themselves in what is true. I'm not saying people should continue to be dispensationalists. I am personally not a dispensationalist, and I actually take a lot of serious issues with dispensationalism. I think it has real effects, and I think it has real consequences that have not been good. But an overreaction to those things is not good either. Two wrongs don't make a right. And so really just the last thing I want to let you go with here is don't let your politics impact your theology. Let your theology, and genuine theology, not impacted by anything else around you. Let your theology be the thing that causes you to believe what you believe on political matters.